What does it take to be a young CEO and all those young Silicon Valley CEOs? Well, Dennis Berman is coming on to discuss my time as a young CEO. I need to find somebody who wouldn't who'd call it like he saw it.
You
Dennis.
know, we're just putting up the ping pong table so you can play against yourself. So let's tell us about yourself.
No, I don't want to do. But let's. There are now more. You know, if you go back to when I was a young CEO, I was a young CEO back in 2001, 2002, during the internet boom. Now, during like the second coming of Silicon Valley, we start to see another group of young CEOs. Obviously Mark Zuckerberg, Andrew Mason at Groupon, this fellow who runs Zillow.
Yep.
Do you think there's any connection between being a CEO and age? Or you think it just depends on person at the time, the place?
Well, I'd sort of put it in two different buckets. One is that at this point in the cycle, age is credibility and youth is credibility. Remember the old saying, I'm sure when you were a kid growing up, you know, never trust anyone over 30. Right? When it comes to a certain type of business, to not trust anyone over 30 perhaps is a reasonable point of view.
Right. So the Silicon Valley, the startups there like a Google or a Facebook were started by young people who kind of got it at a young age.
They kind of got it. And the whole iconography of Silicon Valley and of tech businesses today is about young people using technology to change the world for better or for ill. On the other side, I think of it just perhaps in some ways like you experienced, Evan. We're at a point where these companies and these people can do no wrong.
Right.
And I'm very interested to see when things do go poorly, how these young people respond. Do they have the experience? Having grown so quickly and come to market so quickly, do they have the experience to
It's
adapt?
going to be interesting on that front. It'll be interesting to see how Andrew Mason, who had a little bit of a bumpy ride going into the IPO of Groupon, they had a negotiation to sell the company to Google. They didn't sell it to Google. Then they had an IPO. There was a lot of fun. And now the stock's run up a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see over the next few quarters how Groupon reacts to, you know, because they're going to have to deliver the goods for Wall Street.
But if I had to say, would Andrew Mason be the CEO of Groupon 5 years from now? My gut would say no. There will be some
There's a life
bump.
stage in a company.
There'll be some bump. The investors will be upset. Let's get some new blood in there. Now, what's interesting about Mark Zuckerberg, Evan, is that he's got an iron grip on that company, and that is remarkable about this IPO. However invincible Facebook seems today, the fact that investors are willing to give him full control over that company's board is distinct.
I draw the distinction between the CEO who starts the company, the founder CEO. Take somebody like Michael Dell, who founded Dell at a very young age, grew with Dell, and I've met him a number of times. A very impressive CEO from a perspective, and remember he left Dell, and then he came back again as CEO. Very impressive CEO as someone who I think you could look to, who took a company from its various stages, matured along with the company, and was a great, what I call, operational CEO. He not only had the vision, but he had the ability to execute. Somebody like a Michael Dell. I think it remains to be seen whether an Andrew Mason, who starts up Groupon, can take it, you know, through the operational stage. Again, I don't want to draw any conclusions just yet. What do you think it is about age? I think it was in the S&P 500 now. The average CEO is still quite old, 53, 54. I'm sure over time that has come down. But the reality is, for old, mature companies, you know, you don't get to the top by being a 35-year-old wonderkin.
No, and Procter & Gamble would not get the respect of its investors if it put a 34, 35-year-old person.
And there are lots
of
companies that are kind of in that bucket. I mean, I have a hard time thinking of a Fortune 500, you know, big, kind of well-regarded, you know, like an IBM. You know, IBM, when they just put in a new CEO, Virginia Romnetti. I think I may be getting her name wrong a little bit. But, you know, she worked her way. And in larger companies, established companies, you know, being a CEO is all about having street cred, not just investor cred, but credibility within the company. And it's very hard to look at any young guy, even if he's the most brilliant software engineer in the world, coming into an IBM as 35 and running IBM.
But don't you think there's something to be said that age in some ways is overweighted, in that someone who happens to be young, who is extremely capable, might be the best person for the job, and not just a technology company, but perhaps just a different type of company. We have a bias societally towards putting people in those positions.
Yes, no, absolutely, because especially in the modern age, where what is the role of the CEO? We think of CEO, we think of somebody like Jeff Immelt. You think of a guy who's like an ambassador. He's not even, what does he do operationally? Who knows? But he goes, he meets with Obama. You know, guy's tall, big guy, you know, a lot of gravitas. People look at that and it fits the traditional mold of what a CEO is supposed to do.
Right.
But, you know, you could argue that a guy who was kind of had his mind on what a CEO was supposed to do wasn't necessarily the best ambassador if you were a General Electric shareholder.
No.
In a weird way, GE might have been better off by shaking the place up 5 or 6 years ago, brought somebody from the outside who was young, who saw GE in a somewhat different light.
I love that you've used this opportunity to pick on Jeff Immelt.
Well, you know, I gotta take my shots when I can.
I think journalistically we want to find patterns in here that this person is right and that person is wrong, but when it comes down to it, it really depends on the individual.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the circumstance. You know, the reason why I ended up as the CEO of the company that I was, which was, you know, still had 1,000 employees at one time, was because I had the trust, for better or worse, of the true shareholders, the founding shareholders, who trusted me in spite of my age. They knew me to run the company. And in a weird way, in that circumstance, it would have been hard. You would have been very hard pressed to find a 50 or 55-year-old man to work in a kind of startup scenario.
And so based on your experience, Evan, did you find that you were the right age for that job?
I felt it wasn't, you know, the failings of the company and my personal failings had very little to do with my age, I felt. They had a lot to do, with what the company was trying to do more than with me. But I don't, you know, it's weird because I look back and I don't go, oh geez, if I had been more mature, I would have.
Right, that might have been relevant to the success of the company, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But do you think you would have been better, however flawed you may have been, would you have been better with 5, 10 more years experience?
It's funny. I think nobody who was more experienced would have taken the job. I don't know how you're supposed to read it. Dennis Berman, thank you.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance sometimes is bliss.